Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is John Fisher with MassDEP. Becky Ferguson is also here with me from our Municipal Waste Reduction Branch. She'll be helping me run the meeting, let folks in, and keep track of the chat. As you just heard a moment ago, we will be recording this meeting. We do post-meeting recordings on the MassDEP website after the meeting. So both to make that available to all of you, but also to make it available for anyone who is not able to join us here this morning. And of course, I'll also be posting the meeting presentation after the meeting here today. So I'll start by just laying out our agenda here this morning. So I'm going to start by recapping the presentation that I gave at our October Organic Subcommittee meeting. This will be an abbreviated version of that presentation, but I do think it's important for those who haven't heard that before to ensure that everyone has kind of the same basic context and background for our discussion here this morning. So I'll be starting with kind of an abbreviated version of that presentation, give some time for y'all to ask any questions you might have about that. And then from there, we want to set the bulk of the time for this meeting to identify concerns, questions, potential problems, or barriers that are out there that may prevent successful implementation of an expanded waste disposal ban, may need to be addressed before we could proceed with an expanded disposal ban, or just raise concerns with that approach. So as in the past, it's really important for us to have robust stakeholder input and participation before we move forward with any formal regulatory process. So that's where we're at now. Part of what we want to do in that spirit is identify other stakeholders and representative organizations who are not here today, who may not be aware of these discussions, to make sure that one, they're aware, and two, that they have the chance to ask questions, raise concerns about what we're doing here, what we're proposing to do. And I will note that everything that we're talking about here this morning is an informal proposed approach. It's really an approach for purposes of discussion. We expect this to be a fairly lengthy stakeholder engagement process before we would move forward with any kind of formal regulatory process. In the past, that's typically been a 9 to 12-month process before we would initiate any kind of formal regulatory development. So we're very much at that formative stage right now, seeking input, and have not made, any final decisions about exactly what we're going to be doing and when. So all of that remains open for discussion here today. And this certainly won't be the only opportunity to have input into that. But we hope to hear a lot from folks today about issues we need to be thinking about as we proceed down this path. Okay, so just a little bit of big picture background. I'm going to make this pretty brief, but I do think it's important context. Food waste, as probably most of you know, is the single largest material in our solid waste stream. It represents just over 20% of our municipal solid waste stream that comes out to about 930,000 tons a year. We have a rough estimate that that's slightly more from the commercial waste stream than the residential stream, but there are significant amounts of food waste from both commercial and residential sources, roughly 500,000 ton to 400,000 tons split. But that's a very rough number, and there's a lot of factors that could sway that one way or the other. Our 2030 food waste reduction goal in our solid waste master plan is to achieve annual diversion of 780,000 tons by 2030. As of 2024, we are at 370,000 tons. So we still have, about 400,000 tons that we need to achieve to get to that 2030 goal. When we developed the two phases of our commercial organics waste disposal ban, I'll talk more about those in a moment, we estimated between the two, we might get about 400,000 tons of food material captured. So we're pretty close to that right now, and sort of suggests that we're entering a phase where we would likely see diminishing returns from the current work that we're doing. And to really expand our progress, we need to be more effectively capturing food material from smaller businesses and from residents. So that's really been kind of a shift in our focus, and will continue to be a shift in our focus going forward. So by way of background, we've been working on food waste reduction for a long time in Massachusetts, really over the course of decades, but this is the more recent history of that work. We developed our initial organics action plan in 2012. That was part of a stakeholder process like this. And that was both to frame how the initial food waste disposal ban was going to work, as well as ensure that we had all the necessary supporting programs in place. We did proceed with draft regulations for that waste ban in 2013 and began that ban with an effective date of November 2014. We made good progress with implementation of that ban and with diversion of food material. So we went through another stakeholder process in the 2020-2021 timeframe and expanded that food waste disposal ban in November of 2022. Kind of concurrent with that work, we were working on our 2030 Solid Waste Master Plan, which was published in 2021 ultimately. And in that plan, we committed to conduct a stakeholder process by 2025 to assess whether to ban all organic waste from disposal by 2030. And in particular, in that statement, we were focused on food waste. So that's the process we're going through right now. We do expect this process to extend into 2026, as I mentioned already. But this is that process that we referenced in our 2030 Solid Waste Master Plan. So here's a snapshot of the progress through the years. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. This will be available up on our website, and it's actually available from the October meeting presentation already. But the point I want to kind of focus on here is that you can see the bottom row of this chart. You can see really substantial progress with food waste reduction from 2016 up through about 2019. And then kind of from 2020 forward, we've seen some more progress, but the overall progress has kind of leveled off a bit. And that's part of what I mentioned a moment ago, where we feel like we're starting to see diminishing returns from our current approach and our current focus on diverting food material from larger businesses and institutions. So again, our 2030 goal, 780,000 tons total food waste diversion. As you saw a second ago, we're at 370,000 tons right now. Our estimate of total current capacity to manage food waste in Massachusetts is about 500,000 tons, 510,000 tons. There's some flux in that number. There's some areas of uncertainty. And there's also regional capacity dynamics going on where food waste could move from Massachusetts to a facility in another state and vice versa. So there's a growing regional capacity picture. But just looking at what we have available in Massachusetts, we estimate in a neighborhood of 500,000 tons, which shows potential available current capacity of about 140,000 tons. And if you accept all that as accurate, to reach our 2030 goal, we would need at least 270,000 tons of additional capacity. And that would likely need to be more distributed capacity to reduce transportation distances, to reduce collection routes, collecting material from more smaller sources. So this becomes maybe a dynamic of not just what our overall capacity is, but where it's located and how it's distributed. Another really important note and kind of a background point is that there's been a lot of progress among cities and towns implementing some type of food waste collection program for their residents. And there are varying approaches. A lot of them are not serving 100% of residents in the community. Many are opt-in programs. Many are not a direct municipal program, but a kind of a partnership with a preferred vendor for food waste collection. But nonetheless, we've seen 160 municipalities report some type of food waste collection program, and anecdotally, that seems to be continuing to rise as we go. The reported tonnage from those programs, which may be a little bit of an underestimate, but they reported about 20,000 tons of food scraps collected in 2024. And we've also had longstanding programs to work with cities and towns to distribute discounted home compost bins to residents. So that's certainly part of the capacity picture as well. Okay, so that's a real quick abbreviated review of our background. Just want to pause and just see if there's any questions about any of that information before I move forward to the next stage of my talk here.
There are no questions in the chat.
Okay, super. We'll keep on going. So that brings us to, like I mentioned, we're kind of at this transition point, and we're still very, very focused on food waste diversion from larger generators, ensuring compliance with our existing food waste disposal ban. That remains a priority and focus for us. But we are starting to work on this transition to focusing on diverting food material from smaller generators, and a potential expanded food waste disposal ban is a big part of that, of any potential strategy there. So some of the things that we're looking at and that we're seeing, there's still an overall dynamic that our solid waste disposal capacity in Massachusetts and throughout the region is severely limited. If any of you came to our Solid Waste Advisory Committee meeting recently, I presented our 2024 solid waste data showing that picture. A lot of our solid waste in Massachusetts on a net basis goes for disposal to disposal facilities in other states. That's not where we'd like to be. We'd like to be more effective at addressing capacity for our waste management needs here in Massachusetts. And certainly one way we can do that is by diverting more material from disposal and needing less solid waste disposal capacity. So that, underlies all of what we're talking about here. We have seen this leveling off of our food waste diversion progress over the last few years, suggesting that a shift and change in focus and approach is needed. We also feel that just due to the nature that our waste ban inspections and enforcement take, that we're not able to be probably 100% effective with our enforcement of the 1.5 ton per week threshold. And a brief explanation of that is just that our enforcement is based on inspections where we're doing volume-based load observations of food material. And food material in the trash is typically difficult to observe on a volume basis. It tends to break down quite a bit. Much of it tends to be in bags. So enforcing at the 0.5 ton per week threshold is really pretty conservative, and in practice, we're likely effectively enforcing somewhere above that threshold. So we would like to develop an approach where we can take more effective enforcement, at least at the 0.5 ton per week threshold. We definitely want to encourage more food donation and rescue. I took this slide out of my presentation today to make things shorter, but we, like everywhere else in the country, we continue to see these ironic problems of excess surplus food waste along with food scarcity. And there's really compelling social and economic reasons to try to capture more of our surplus food and divert it to donation and rescue outlets. So we'd really like to do a better job with that. Coincidentally, that can also be a really cost-effective way for businesses and institutions to reduce disposal of food material and more effectively comply with the food waste ban. We do have some available capacity, but we also have a need and opportunity for more diversion and more capacity growth. Earlier this year, we conducted a report that focused on the economic benefits and the business benefits of implementing the food waste disposal ban and all of the associated programs. And we saw that there was significant job activity and economic activity associated with implementing this ban. So we know that driving more food waste diversion from disposal not only has environmental benefits in that regard, but also important economic and business growth benefits. So in that context, we'd really like to try to spur more continued capacity growth going forward. Some of the things that we need to be thinking about is what can we do better? How can we be as effective as possible with voluntary programs? How far can we get with voluntary programs? We need to be very mindful of the cost effectiveness of collection from smaller sources. That's where strategies like food waste prevention and source reduction, and also donation and rescue can be really important elements of any strategy here. As I've alluded to already, we need to ensure that we have the infrastructure to manage additional materials that would be separated and diverted from the waste stream. We believe we have some of what we need, but not all. And then we also have to be obviously very careful about potential increased contamination from more smaller sources as we grow our food waste collection infrastructure. We need to ensure that material that's being diverted from disposal is clean, source separated material, material that can go effectively to the end markets that it's being used for. And then again, we need to ensure that we can inspect and enforce a disposal ban effectively. That's, of course, important to us for all of our waste disposal bans. So I'm going to pause again. The next slide here, I'm going to talk about this initial proposed approach that we floated for discussion purposes, but I'm just trying to pause along the way to make sure I don't get too far ahead of things and make sure I address any questions on a timely basis.
There are a couple questions. Charlotte Milan asked if data from school systems is affecting our planning or how that factors into any planning.
Data from school systems. So we don't have specific data from school systems. That doesn't, food waste diversion from schools doesn't get specifically reported to us. We do know that there are a number of schools and school systems that have set up food waste diversion programs, but I don't think we have a lot of specific data about that. One thing that I'm going to talk about in a later slide is that, we are aware that ensuring that schools have support to implement expanded food waste diversion programs is going to be really important going forward. That's going to be a really important sector. And we do expect to have to work closely with schools to ensure, any school food waste diversion programs are implemented effectively. Not sure if that fully addressed your question, Charlotte. Feel free to hop off mute if you'd like.
Yeah, that sounds great. I just wanted to make sure. I know that Arlington we do have data. I know other schools have data. There's a great support system that's supported by MassDEP for our schools to be able to do the work that they do. And I just hope that data can be useful and can be used for planning. I think it's a frontline opportunity in our quest to educate the entire public.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
John, there was another question in the chat from Vanessa in terms of the need for capacity. And you talked about this a little bit, but how do we expand capacity and keep it uncontaminated? And is there any concern about co-digesters, which may be more contaminated with plastics and sludge? Will they be used more heavily?
Sure. So let's see. So it's a little bit of a complicated question, but a couple of things I'd say in response to that is that food material typically needs to be separated in a way that fits the market that it's going to. Um, Generally speaking, I think, the more we can get as clean and source separated material as possible with as less contamination as possible is going to be really important. It's been important. It'll continue to be important. That's something that one of our key supporting programs in this work is our Recycling Works in Massachusetts program that provides free assistance to businesses and institutions. That's something we emphasize a lot in technical assistance provided through that program. I think one of the things that's been interesting about what I've heard anecdotally anyway about a lot of municipal programs is many of these programs have started on a voluntary opt-in basis. And from what I'm hearing, it seems like they're being very effective at generating clean, source-separated food waste streams. So I think that's really interesting and maybe an important thing to keep in mind when you start thinking about trade-offs to growing those programs, implementing them municipality-wide. There are potential trade-offs there with contamination. There are deep packaging facilities in the state that do have the ability to separate packaging from food material to some degree. Those were initially intended really, as the name implies, to manage packaged food material. Over time, we do know that those have been used more broadly, and they've been used to kind of take, you know, maybe more packaged food material in, and there, important trade-offs there with labor costs for the generators of those materials, along with ensuring that any material that's coming out of those facilities is clean and appropriate for how it's being used. So those are a few issues. Just on the co-digestion at wastewater treatment plants, I believe that our Bureau of Resource Protection, which regulates drinking water and wastewater programs, is developing regulations to look at managing residuals from wastewater treatment plants. So that would certainly be, considered in that context, I think. So hopefully that addresses your question. There's a number of elements to it. So if there's something I didn't address there, just, please feel free to unmute yourself and I can address anything I might have missed.
She put a note in saying that.
I can go off mute. I'm a bit sick though. Sorry about that. Thanks for that info. That's really helpful. Do you feel that that depackagers then will be used more heavily? We do have a concern that depackagers tend to have the output from that tends to be kind of inherently contaminated because the process does need to kind of deal with the plastics. So I'm curious to know what the idea is to either integrate them more or actually like maybe isolate the output a little bit more from what comes out of depackagers.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't have a definite answer for that. I know that, depackagers can be a really valuable component of a food waste management system that can enable us to divert material that just wouldn't be viable to divert otherwise. And where that started was these really large quantities of food material that were destined for disposal for various reasons. They may have become contaminated. They may have been damaged in transportation or a power outage or things like that. And, technologies like that allowed the diversion of that material from disposal in a way that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. So I think there's certainly an important role for depackaging facilities. I would agree that, we need to be mindful of what those facilities are taking, and what's the quality of the material coming out of those facilities, and therefore where and how can it be used. So I think there's still important questions remaining there. So not a definite answer there, but I agree there's important questions to think about in that context.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, I'm going to jump into the next couple of slides here. So for any of you that participated in our October meeting, you already saw this and you heard me talk about it, but doesn't hurt to say it again. And definitely need to share this for anyone who was not at our October meeting. So again, this is a proposal for discussion purposes. This is not anything where we've made up our mind one way or another, but something where we felt it was important to share a potential proposed approach, to really engage around this and get feedback around a specific proposed approach going forward. So that's kind of the spirit of what I've written here. The dates are no sooner than dates, given how regulatory processes go, and just the degree of public input and engagement that needs to happen with a decision like this. I'd say more likely than not, these dates would be later than what I've drafted here, but I've just put what we kind of feel is like I guess what I would say is the soonest possible date any of these things could happen. So what we've thought about here and what we've shared is a potential two-stage expansion of our food waste disposal ban. The first one would be lowering the commercial organics ban threshold to 0, but maintaining that ban as applied to businesses and institutions only and not residential. The intent here is, if you're a business with kind of incidental food waste, like an office with lunchroom waste, medical offices, non-food retail stores, places like that, whether it happened formally or informally, we really don't see the ban applying to entities like that. And this gets into kind of more about how a ban like this would be implemented. So whether we do that as something we say in guidance or just something we clarify in outreach remains to be seen. But just to clarify that, when we talk about lowering the threshold to 0, from an implementation standpoint, we're not talking literally 0. And we're really still focused on businesses and institutions that have some type of food service component to the business. This gets into the question that Charlotte raised a little bit earlier. This would most likely include all schools, assuming they have a cafeteria, assuming it's full day. School would likely need to take steps to comply and to reduce food waste in some shape or form. So this is a potential first stage of a waste ban expansion. And then a potential second stage, again with a no sooner than date of 2030, would be to expand that to include residential food waste. So it would essentially be akin to a complete food waste disposal ban at that point. I'm going to talk in a minute about how waste bans get implemented and what a universal disposal ban looks like in practice. And I'll also just note these dates. We do think this November type date or some date in the fall is kind of an appropriate date for a ban to go into effect. Summer is a tough time to start a program. This kind of allows programs for anyone who's operating on an academic year, allows programs to be implemented within the course of an academic year. And just not a bad time to start separating food waste from a potential nuisance and odor concerns perspective. It's, you wouldn't really want to start a program in June. That's not ideal. So that November date, whatever the year is kind of purposeful. That's what we did for our first 2 food waste bans, and I think it makes a certain amount of sense. So as far as residential food waste and municipal programs, we used to have a program called the Department Approved Recycling Program or the Department Approved Composting Program that laid out kind of a basic program standard for municipalities to meet. And if they met that program standard, they'd receive essentially a buffer for MassDEP waste ban enforcement. We're thinking about something similar here for a municipal food waste program. So if a municipality established one of our specified program options, a menu, taking the obvious pun, they would be considered compliant. And this would likely include some combination of options between curbside collection, drop-off collection, home compost bin distribution, or subscription service options. And this would likely increase over time. So we'd start with a certain base program standard and maybe, every couple of years, maybe increase that standard over time. And it would likely vary for municipalities with curbside trash collection and drop-off trash collection. Obviously, a municipality with drop-off trash collection and curbside collection program doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So that's kind of how we're thinking about that, how that might work for implementation for municipalities. I want to jump into my next couple slides because I think it's important to explain how this type of ban would work and what it would mean, what it would look like in practice, and then I'll kind of open things up at that point. Okay, so if you're not familiar with waste disposal bans, MassDEP conducts compliance inspections at solid waste facilities. So this could be a solid waste transfer station, a municipal waste combustion facility, or a landfill. And we basically stand there and observe incoming loads for a period of time. Now, while there are no allowable disposal amounts in the waste ban regulations, with the exception of the current food waste ban, we do consider action levels for certain materials like cardboard, bottles and cans, recyclable paper, leaves and yard waste. Solid waste facilities use those action levels for their implementation purposes for tracking and monitoring failed loads. For example, the action level for cardboard is 10% by volume. And MassDEP considers action levels, but we may enforce below an action level in certain scenarios. The best example of that is when we see what we call a front load packer route. It's collecting dumpsters or carts from a number of businesses. We may be able to identify banned materials from a particular business within that load, may not rise to that threshold level for the whole load, but for that portion of the load, that material may be significant and we may implement enforcement. But generally speaking, we're not enforcing these waste bans down to zero. Enforcement is a resource-intensive approach for us to get compliance, and we really want to focus enforcement actions on where we're getting the most bang for our buck. So when we talk about zero threshold, that's kind of what we have already for cardboard, bottles and cans, and other materials. And a zero threshold food waste ban would work in a similar way as those existing waste bans work. So we would issue enforcement for significant amounts of a banned material. As with all our waste bans, we don't enforce waste bans against individuals. So if we were to get to the point of a residential waste disposal ban, it's not like we'd be looking in your trash cart, seeing food waste and issuing you a notice of noncompliance. We use waste ban enforcement for businesses, institutions, or government entities. And we typically do not do it for minimal quantities of a banned material, again, because that just is really not a good use of our compliance and enforcement resources. However, a zero threshold ban would not require that we know exactly how much material is from each generator, and knowing that it's, whether it was a ton per week or a half ton per week or any other threshold, it would kind of take that factor out of the equation, and we can enforce regardless of exactly how much food waste was in a load from a particular business, similar to what we do with cardboard, bottles and cans, and other materials now. So that is, I have some more slides later on that I can refer to if necessary to provide a little bit more information and context, but I'm going to pause here. I can certainly take questions over what I just presented, and then I really want to also open this up at this point to hear any questions or concerns you may have about any aspects of this work, whether it's a waistband regulation itself, supporting programs, infrastructure issues, whatever questions, concerns, comments you might have. So with that, Becky, why don't we open it up to questions?
Great. There are a couple in the chat already. First one is dovetailing on Vanessa's point, what initiatives can be undertaken to demonstrate and scale out standalone on-site and community scale anaerobic microdigesters across sectors?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm going to jump ahead a few slides because there's some programmatic context where I can help address that question. So hold on. Okay. So a number of different ways that MassDEP supports infrastructure development for food waste, also for other recyclables. So this includes our recycling and reuse business development grants. These are for capital costs. Past grants have gone up to a maximum of $400,000. However, we're now finalizing the next program application. We're considering a larger grant cap for those projects, and we do expect food material to be a targeted material. Those grants have always been limited to target materials. We do expect food material to be a target material, so that's a potential avenue for delivering grant funding to support a project. We also have a recycling loan fund. This goes way back to the 1990s. This is open for applications on an ongoing basis. Unlike our grant programs, they all have specific application deadlines and grant cycles. You can apply for a loan from the recycling loan fund at any point. This is intended to help businesses gain access to financing when they may not be able to get traditional bank financing or not get adequate financing from traditional lending outlets, or this can also help leverage and be combined with other financing sources. That right now, those loans can go up to $500,000, although we're just going through a contract renewal process for the loan fund right now and considering an increase to the maximum loan amount as well. $500,000 isn't what it used to be. That loan cap was set a long time ago, and we're looking to potentially increase the maximum loan amount. If we did that, we'd probably have to invest additional principal into the loan fund as well. So we're thinking about that. We just need to kind of take stock of all the budget implications of doing that, but that's something we're considering. We do have separate funding for anaerobic digestion that allows us to issue larger loan amounts for anaerobic digestion projects that can go up to $1.5 million for anaerobic digestion. We also have, through our Recycling Works in Massachusetts program, we delivered compost site technical assistance. And then through our Waste Reduction Innovations Grant, we're currently have our grant recommendations for that first round of that grant program going through management review now. We hope to finalize, notify grant finalists shortly. And there were some proposed projects there related to food waste. Once we can get that get those grant contracts announced and finalized, we'll start thinking about the next application. Again, food material likely to be a focal point of that program. And then gloss over Recycling Works. This is the other area where we can support infrastructure growth. We do actually right now have an active grant that's kind of along those lines to the town of Winchester. So we're interested to see how that program works. It's a small scale AD system that's kind of co-sited with their existing composting operation at their transfer station. So we're interested to see how that project goes, how that equipment works. And we do have the ability to fund other municipal investments, including things like collection carts, drop-off equipment, but also the organics capacity grants are for projects like a municipal composting site, a small-scale anaerobic digestion facility, things like that. So those are some of the ways that we can potentially support some of the infrastructure needs. So hopefully that helps address that question.
Phil Goddard has his hand up, and then after him, John Petroff has his hand up.
Okay.
Morning, everyone. Phil Goddard, Town of Bourne. You hear me okay?
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, great. Couple of things. I'm repeating myself from October, but it just occurred to me when you gave the update to the SWAC meeting. I think, John, you really need to create a section within the reporting or the description of the data, really focused on capacity, types of capacity, AD, composting by region, and compare that against your tonnage goal of, I think you said, increasing by 207,000 tons. Because it's going to identify these gaps. And, urban is a lot more difficult than, suburban and rural for a lot of reasons, and they tend to go with anaerobic digestion. So I think that whole topic needs to be expanded as a section because you're counting on that as a significant part of the diversion to meet the diversion goal. So I would do a deep dive on capacity, show the gaps, and then get the spreadsheets updated so that developers have an opportunity to understand where they want to go to do new capacity, that you may want to identify gaps. So I think that would be really helpful to all of us to see that and what's existing and what's permitted. And the reason I say that is extremely difficult because we know the state's not able to build facilities, but you're relying on municipalities and private sector organizations to do that capacity. And another comment to that, you may want to look at California and Connecticut, but Connecticut, I believe, had a standard that you had to be within 25 miles of a facility. So I understand the ban is, let's get it going, but you may want to say if capacity is available, because if it's not online and these projects should take 2 to 3 years or more to permit and fund, I know that the date's movable, right? You put that caveat there, but I think we need to be realistic that if we're not seeing projects coming through your desk or the local boards of health, I know there's site assignment amendments to allow smaller facilities and so forth and so on, but you really need to dig into logistics of how this is going to get done and how the developers, you got to think like a developer, are actually going to do this and get through the local, because nowadays, because of odor concerns, even compost sites are not popular. And your data showed that when I asked you, I think a year ago at the update, we lost like a significant amount of capacity for compost sites, and it's dropped like by 50,000 tons. It's in your chart there. And it was like 50,000 tons. There you go. And that was from a variety of reasons, but if they're odor or other operational factors, really need to dig into why those projects failed and understand how that can be improved for new capacity to replace what we already lost in addition to the 270. So you see where I'm going. All these details, I think, again, the state's not going to, build and finance and operate a facility, but I think you need to look at all of these concerns very significantly to smooth the permitting pathways, logistics, and all these types of things. Additionally, I think you might want to start reaching out to the restaurant associations of the state, really dig into my dear friend Maria Leva from the Canal Area Chamber of Commerce was on the call in October, and she represents, restaurants in the Upper Cape. And for them to start suddenly having to come up with, a plan to divert all the French fries and clams and lobsters and oysters and things in, the summer in the next 3 years, 4 years, whatever it may be, it's a significant challenge for, very busy restaurants in the summer. So I would start talking to anybody in that space as soon as possible to make sure they're aware of it. And, they may say, well, I'm macerating it and putting it into the sewer system. So does that comply? I'm using this dewatering system that makes solids and then that goes in the trash. Does that comply? So all those I've heard both of those instances. Do those, get you out of the waistband or satisfy the waistband if you're at a hotel? And the last thing I'll say is another role the state can play, and you talked about this in the master plan, that must have been 10, 15 years ago, and AD was, really a significant part of the discussion, is what state land is available. And what are the permitting challenges that the legislature may have to vote on to give more latitude. And that includes, state parks, large open spaces around, universities, whatever. I really think you need to do an inventory with DCAM and other, sister agencies within the family of agencies within the state, DAR, farms, all those need to be on the table. If the state has some land available, they could put out to bid for an operator to come in just like a town would do, right? So you may not finance and build it, but you may make a land available. So finding a place to do these things, especially for those on the call, and I'm certainly in that category, would like to see soil as, making compost sites. We're working on the Cape very, very diligently with MassDEP and Joint Base Cape Cod to site a facility as an example. But that's a lot of detailed work. And so I would encourage the staff to look into all those operations early now. I'm happy to talk offline if you'd like, but I think these are the kind of the granularity you need to start to get into. And I'm sure, talking to some of the developers on the call here, like John and, Connor and others from facility operators that are, looking to do this, and they're small businesses and it's a big lift. So that's my comments. But I think having that 30,000-foot view from a spreadsheet perspective on, what's up and working now and how many of these facilities you're going to need to do to get to the 270. So thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
Just wondering, just one question you raised. Management of organic materials in a wastewater system is compliant with the food waste disposal ban.
Okay.
But what we always tell people is, you also need to be checking with your local wastewater utility to make sure that you're compliant with them as well. So it's compliant with the food waste ban because it's not going into the trash.
Yep.
So but we always encourage anyone who's thinking about investing in that kind of equipment or system should also be talking with whatever it is, their local sewer system, MWRA, whoever it might be.
That's a great point. You may want to meet with those POTWs. Some may want it, some may not want it, especially on a smaller scale. You get, BOD overloading or the bugs are different. I'm not an engineer. But also, again, when you're talking to restaurants and hotels and folks that think that that's the solution and they may not realize that, so that the POTW operators are aware this is all coming and they may get this surge in their systems that they're not expecting, especially fats, oils, and grease and those clogged systems. So thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I did want to just make one note about capacity too that's not shown in this chart, but it's an important dynamic. I did have a slide about this in the earlier October presentation, but one of the things we also look at consistently is food waste prevention strategies at the source, and in particular tracking systems that enable businesses and institutions to be more efficient in their food operation. Doesn't necessarily get them down to zero food waste, of course, but we've seen many examples of those systems achieving really substantial reductions in wasted food in the order of 50-60% reduction. So when we start thinking about capacity need, systems that reduce the amount of food waste that's being created in the first place can really have an impact on capacity. So
that's huge. I think then you need to talk to the supermarket associations, if there is such a thing, to look at the labels on the tomatoes, the plastic PFAS labels. You need to look at the expiration dates, all the things you've talked about in your studies. Ugly food campaigns where people are discouraged. They do this in Europe, where they, the fruit looks a little, looks normal, but we all want the perfectly round tomatoes, and there's all those diversion techniques. So I think the Harvard study, you did some work with the Harvard School on this. All those detailed recommendations, all the stakeholders, I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of waste at the at the supermarket level with packaging and spoilage or people thinking it's spoiled, they throw it out too early. So all those things we all talked about the last several years, I think you really ramp up the efforts and outreach would be really helpful.
I think was it John next? John Petrov?
Yeah, John's next.
All right, thank you guys. I got a couple things. Not necessarily looking for answers, just kind of wanted to throw some thoughts out there. Um, so about the compliance at the transfer station level, just curious what it's going to look like as far as how often. And I know at a previous meeting I brought up like what does that exactly look like? And I know that DEP isn't going through bags or anything like that, but I do think there is um, quite a lot of wiggle room as far as people not complying. If I'm not asking people to go through bags, but I think there needs to be some sort of better system because I feel people that don't want to comply are just going to put all their food in the bag and throw it away like they've been doing. So I think that's a very slippery slope to people not complying. I don't know what that would look like. It's just a concern. Um, Especially where we are, I don't know how often DEP is doing checks at transfer stations and stuff in small towns that we live in. And, there can be a lot of material that gets through that way. I also feel that there's kind of like this disconnect, and Phil made a great point about going to the restaurants directly, restaurant associations, hotel associations, things like that, where there's a disconnect where they don't necessarily know what's happening with their waste. They're just okay, somebody takes and does something else with it. I think there needs to be something, another way to maybe check the material at the source, especially at sources where they're creating a lot of food waste, because they can have a hauler taking it somewhere, and then what happens with it? So, obviously, if they're working with a composting company, a hauler, they can trust hopefully that that's going somewhere where it's supposed to go. But maybe there can be something done with mandating other haulers of MSW to have to offer, um, you know, food waste hauling as a side type of thing. I think they did something like that in Vermont. I'm not exactly sure, but something to think about there because I do feel that compliance is going to be tough, especially where we are, with people just gonna can just throw it in a bag. Trash haulers, I don't feel are going to redo their entire infrastructure to their business to offer food scrap hauling in addition to their trash hauling. They just want to throw it all in their truck, dump it at the local transfer station, be done with it. So I feel like that's a big concern as far as not only compliance but contamination if they do decide that they want to. It's going to be asking a lot of extra work of trash haulers who don't necessarily care about composting. It's different if you're a business like ours or somebody that's, doing this regularly and cares about it. But somebody that's being mandated into it isn't going to care enough to just not throw it in a bag and hide it. Um, so I think Phil brought up a good point, like starting at the source of where that's coming from, having discussions with them, like what does that look like for them? Who do they work with already? I think maybe partnering or talking closer with municipalities themselves, like Board of Health, the boards of health, things like that, where you can get in a little bit more into each individual municipality and see where the waste is coming from and how they can help. I know I've talked about that before, but I don't know what that could look like as far as the law and what, state level and stuff like that. But just something to think about. Um, and then also, capacity was something that somebody mentioned, and it's a whole other conversation, but also something that I think is important to come up at some point, and where I've been having a few talks here and there with folks about it is getting certified through DEP to operate a composting facility is not, you guys make it pretty easy process to do, and I'm very thankful for that. It's not a heavy lift in order to get certified to do that. However, it's very hard to find land where you can do it at. And even once you're in and you're certified, problems come up and it can be very hard. And you know, try to understand that graph that Phil had you bring up that showed how much composting has gone down. It's
Mhm.
extremely hard to keep a compost facility, you know, get it going, keep it running with all the problems that can come up. So I think something needs to be done. And again, longer conversation here at some point. But as far as why are we not considered agricultural? Everything we do is creating soil that's, you know, soil amendment that's going to be used in an agricultural way. I think there's this disconnect between DEP and MDR, where MDR regulates one thing, MassDEP regulates another, but I'm exempt from all that agricultural land in a lot of ways because we go through DEP, and it really limits how many places I can be at, and it's very hard to find land, very hard, even where we are in very rural land. I'm not available to a lot of grants. I mean, there's grants that come up through MDR that are, or other agricultural use grants that in the description, the entire thing is about agriculture. This has to be used to create agricultural work. You have to be selling agricultural products, and everything in there is like, that's what I'm doing. I'm creating agricultural product. I'm selling it to farms. We're growing food with it. We're not really, it's not really solid waste. We're taking products that are wasted, but it's a resource. It's not a waste. So I think some of the terminology, some of the way of thinking, and maybe some better partnering with MDR to see what we could do to open that up to, you know, we're going to need more facilities, and I think the real limited thing is that MDR ag type of thing with DEP. Again, it's not hard to get. You guys make the process easy once you find a location, but finding a location can be really extremely hard. So, just a couple thoughts. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, John. I just wanted to comment on one part of your comments on implementation of the waste bans. Um, you know, we're very aware of kind of the limitations of waistband implementation. We've been doing this for decades for other materials, so we're very aware of that. One thing we've started to do more recently is, and we've been doing it for food waste in particular, is sending formal request for information letters to businesses that we believe may be subject to the ban. Those letters require a response about how they're complying with the food waste disposal ban. So I think that's an important element that can complement the inspections that we're doing. The other one that you actually alluded to, and we've had some conversations around this, is partnering with local health departments, probably on a voluntary basis, but working with them when they permit their food service establishments to share information about the waste disposal ban requirements. We had a conversation with a health department recently that was interested in doing that, and we'd certainly be very interested in partnering with local health departments to share information about the waste bans in the context of their permitting food service establishments. So I think that's an important outreach conduit. We're very sensitive to the work burdens that health departments face. They do a lot of things, wear a lot of hats, so very sensitive about not wanting to impose any additional time or resource commitments on them. But where they're interested, be very interested in partnering with health departments on that kind of outreach. I think it could be effective.
Sure, and even like solid waste boards, things like that. And again, you don't need to make the lift on them much more, but even I think that's a great idea, just sending out different things to seeing how people are complying, things like.
Mhm. Was it next?
We have another hand up from Stephen and also some activity in the chat.
Yeah.
Just jumping ahead, Amber Keller said she had a comment about schools and she has to jump off the call at 11:15. So if people don't mind, maybe she can just unmute herself quickly and then we can get to some of the chat and Stephen can do his question. Amber, are you
Sure.
still there?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to share. So yeah, I mentioned in the chat that I work with 2 school districts as the waste reduction coordinator. And really I'm seeing the impactful role that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, or DESE, could play in helping schools to reduce food waste, participate in food donation, and other sources of diversion. And that is because school districts, if they are contracting out for a food service management company, have to go through DESE for the RFP bid process. And currently in that process, DESE's template for the RFP does not include any sort of sustainability measures. So if a district wants the food service management company to think about food waste and participate in food donation, or move to condiment dispensers to help reduce just waste in general and the potential for compost contamination, they have to really be proactive about thinking about that and find a way to get those sustainability measures into this RFP, because there is not a section for that currently. And so I see a strong role for MassDEP to partner with DESE to understand the potential impact of having a sustainability section in that RFP process, and to collaborate on what that section could include, and potentially educating those at the school districts who are filling out that RFP to understand why these measures are important, especially in light of a potential complete food waste ban. I think that would really be impactful in helping school districts comply with the ban, if they're thinking about it from that standpoint of the food service management company contract. And one other thing that I know that Green Sword has been thinking about too is working with MSBA to have incentives for building schools with dishwashers, moving to reusables, which could also help with making the composting process easier by having less forms of waste. So thanks so much for the opportunity to share that.
Thank you, Amber. Just to a real quick clarification, the RFP and contracting process you were talking about there, that was relative to food service contracting. Was that what you said?
Yes, relative to the food service management company, that if they don't have it in-house, it would be for that process of contracting out.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Before we get to Stephen, there are a couple things in the chat. Mike asked about other data we have on organic streams like yard and leaf waste. I put a link in the chat to the municipal solid waste and recycling surveys, which there is a data point in there that we ask for tonnage from municipalities, but I don't know if you have any other comments about that. And less questions. Craig Coker made a comment about developing structural demands for compost use and soil amendments and when new developments as a means to increase rainfall infiltration and reduce stormwater runoff. Again, less of a question and more of a comment.
Okay. Just to hop on Mike's question real quick. I do think that that's an important question. One, because any food waste composting needs a carbon material source. So knowing where those are is important, but also one of the potential conduits to developing a food waste composting operation is to expand an existing leaf and yard waste composting operation. So those are, I think, potentially important infrastructure in this context. Wouldn't make sense for every site or every community, so it's not like something that should be done across the board, but there are certainly places where existing leaf and yard waste composting operations could potentially expand to start taking in food materials. So something to think about. And then they have the carbon material already available.
There's one more question, and then maybe Stephen can unmute and ask. He has his hand raised. But one other quick thing is we had a question about considering grants for reusable utensils, dishes, and containers at restaurants because that reduces contamination at the source. Certainly we have a micro grant program.
Yes.
I can put a link for that as well in the chat.
We've also we've supported projects related to that both through our reuse micro grants and through the recycling and reuse business development grants also.
Maybe Stephen can ask his question now.
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you. And hi, hey, John, would you be all right with me doing a quick plug for Recycling Works?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Just it seems topical with some of the things we're talking about here. So Steve Bandera, program manager for Recycling Works in Massachusetts, just funded by the DEP. And just thought I'd give a brief overview in case folks aren't aware of what we do, Recycling Works. So we're an education and consulting program to help businesses and institutions divert waste. We've been focusing for some years now on, especially on food waste, and we provide this service at no cost to the business or institution because, again, we are funded by the DEP. So I know a couple of people mentioned that, you know, some of this might be a heavy lift for someone to implement one of these new programs. We are there to make that lift lighter. We can help you set it up. We can connect you with haulers. We can give you signage. So we really make it simple. And I won't go into it, but before I was part of Recycling Works, I was a customer, and Recycling Works helped me when I worked at a university and can vouch for how much it helped. So we've been focusing on food waste, and we do all different sectors from, you know, manufacturing and industrial to restaurants, assisted living, hospitals, schools, from K through 12 plus higher education. So we can really help anybody that's looking to do any kind of food waste diversion. And when we do go in and are talking about this, we use the hierarchy. So the first thing we're going to talk about is source reduction. So, you know, let's not even generate it. The next thing we're going to talk about is donation. Like John mentioned, you know, let's solve two problems. Let's help those that are food insecure, et cetera, et cetera. And then we go on down the line, animal feed, AD compost, et cetera. And, you know, finally, it's worth mentioning that we also help haulers and compost sites. So if a hauler is having an issue with contamination, we can come in and talk with the hauler, and if they can identify where some of those contamination issues are coming from, we can go in and help that generator, that business that is giving them the headache. We'll go in and try to will help and solve that problem for the hauler. And we also help compost sites. We just recently, and this will be posted on our website this week, had a webinar geared towards smaller compost sites that are thinking about getting bigger and accepting off-site food scraps. So specifically geared toward this issue that we've seen with John's spreadsheets where capacity on compost site is going down. This webinar was geared to try to reverse that. So somebody who's maybe they're a farm and they're composting on their farm, they're thinking about bringing offsite food scraps. They don't know how to do it. This webinar went through exactly how they could do it. We also have consultants that can come in and help them do it. So yeah, so that was a lot, but I think it's just important to get the word out there about Recycling Works. And on that, my last point is getting the word out. You know, everybody is incredibly busy, and, you know, everybody's got a million things going on, so it is hard to get in front of people. So if anybody here knows of somebody who might benefit from us, or like an association that we could talk to, that would be great. If you could help connect us, I would love to be able to talk to especially associations where we could help lots of people. And again, it is no cost for the people that we help. Thank you for
Yeah,
that
and
time.
Steve,
Yeah.
just on the outreach, I saw a comment from Phil in the chat that Recycling Works needs more promotion, and we do certainly want to do more of that. But I know that as part of the work that I've been doing with these food waste disposal bans, I'm trying to reach out to every applicable business association. I got a list from you guys about chambers that I sent our earlier meeting announcement to. But as I recall, you have a email distribution list that's, I think was larger than 7,000 people, maybe. I know that you are
Yes.
trying to do a lot of that work already.
True, true. Yes. That's a great point, John. Yes. The newsletter distribution list is approaching 7,000. You know, it's interesting, associations, I mentioned that sort of in my, hey, if you can connect us, because associations get a lot of requests from a lot of people. So Chamber of Commerce's get a lot of requests, the Mass
Yeah.
Restaurant Association, different restaurant associations get a lot of requests. And sometimes when we come in and say, hey, we can help your folks for free, I think people have a hard time, maybe, because nothing's for free. And we try to convince them, hey, we really are. So it is sometimes hard to get in front of and to talk to some of these organizations, which is why I ask if there's any way to have an introduction. That's always helpful, any kind of relationship is always helpful. But to your point, John, yes, we do reach out on a regular basis. AIM is another organization that we've done some presenting with, AIM in Massachusetts. Yeah.
Yeah, so certainly, and that's something that I've been doing through this process. It's not just the organic subcommittee meetings. I'm having a lot of conversations in between meetings, trying to reach out to organizations that I think, may have an interest in this, or whose members may have an interest in this. So that's an iterative process. Like Steve said, these businesses have a lot of issues to think about. Recycling and solid waste management is often not the top issue. They're worried about running their businesses. They're worried about labor costs, energy costs, all sorts of issues. So,
Yeah.
it's a parade of issues that they're concerned about and that they have to work on, and this is just one of many issues that they need to think about. So, it is a challenge.
Super. Thank you, John.
I've lost track of where we are in the chat, Becky.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. And Uru, I will reach out directly to you with my contact information. I'm very surprised and sorry to hear that, but we will make sure that does not continue. Absolutely. We'll be in touch.
In the chat, some sharing of information and links and discussions. In terms of direct questions, we did have some an ask for clarification about the Winchester digester. Just what that potential project will be.
Yeah, I don't know if I remember. Do you remember the details off the top of your head, Becky? Or
Yeah. Well, I think yes, they are installing a municipal small scale anaerobic digester. They, as of the last we heard about a month and a half ago, they're waiting for an additional part to get it before it could get up and running. So either it's just up and running or hasn't quite gotten up and running yet. They put it together with some grant money from MassDEP, helped support the installation of the digester. So we're very anxious to see how it goes. We also had a question about funding for municipalities for events and drop-off programs. Certainly, RDP funds and SMRF grants can support municipal food collection at events and at drop-off sites. I'll go ahead and put a link in the chat for those as well. And then I don't think there are any other questions in the chat directly. If we've missed anything, certainly anyone can feel free to raise a hand or jump off mute. And Phil has his hand.
Just a quick follow-up. There's so many great ideas on this call, and you got them in the chat. I know you're taking notes, Becky and John. It's just a suggestion that this kind of get coalesced into the other work you've been doing over the years with the organic subcommittee. Again, I mentioned, I think there was the Harvard study, and kind of put them into like a implementation granular outline book or something, how you're going to do this. And we, maybe that could be as a working group within the subcommittee to kind of go through and see what you've done and what we could do to help fill in the gaps, kind of coalesce all this information. There's a long time between these calls, and then this is the chance we get to tell you these things, and then we go away for however many months, and then but as this gets closer, it's going to be really, a lot of these things we're talking about will help you be successful 2 or 3 years from now. So I think that if it were, put down in a, kind of a detailed action plan, might be something that we could help you, continue to upgrade and work on and fill in the gaps. So just a suggestion. There's a lot going on here. Again, Connecticut and California probably have a lot of advice if you want to talk to your counterparts in those states with implementation. There you go. Thank you.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, as we go, we will certainly get more specific about certain aspects of implementation. Try not to get too far ahead of ourselves so far, but we will be working on updating our organic action plan. We typically provide develop a FAQ document. We have an existing one that would be updated to take account in new issues and questions. So yeah, absolutely. There'll be more detailed information that we'll share as we go. And I've been trying to kind of schedule these meetings as we go to make sure that we're adequately prepared for this meeting, and also recognizing that all of you are busy with other work. Not trying to overload people from a meeting perspective, but we do expect to have fairly regular meetings over the course of the next probably 6 to 9 months to get deeper into these issues. And as we do that, we'll try to follow up on prior input as we go. I saw I'm just skimming through the chat here. I saw a question from John Pitchoff. Do municipalities or solid waste districts have lists of local haulers that you could use to send an update to all haulers to let them know? That is one group that we'll be reaching out to, where we have contacts with haulers from our waste ban compliance work. We'll be sending a notice to all of our haulers about this. So, and contacting facilities as well. So we may not get everybody because we don't have a specific defined list, but we'll be doing some outreach to solid waste haulers as we go.
I think there's much more here. Oh, we put clarification about the Winchester digester in the chat and a link to our press release or a link to their press release if people want some more information about that. But mostly just sharing information in the chat, not.
I just realized that the planning agencies would be one, John. You probably obviously work with those, but regional planning associations, agencies, but like Cape Cod Commission, in the Barnstable County just did a whole study on all this. And, Carrie down here knows all those folks very well, of course, but, it's all in their regional policy planning. So that I'm sure they could help out a lot.
Okay, thanks. All right, so let me just go to the next slide here. So this is kind of what we're doing now. So we want to continue to obtain feedback on the proposed approach that I shared here today. We want to continue to engage more stakeholders to participate in this process. As I mentioned, I've been doing a lot of that offline already, but we'll continue to do that. I know there's some sectors that hopefully a lot of them are on our organic subcommittee email list that I maintain, but I know that oftentimes people need to see and hear about these things multiple times. So I'll be doing kind of more sector-based outreach as we go here, trying to identify and reach out to all the different entities that may be interested in and affected by this work. We'll be holding follow-up meetings to work on more specific issues as we go. That relates a little bit to your comment, Phil. We'll be kind of dividing this up a little bit in future meetings and having some meetings focused on specific aspects of this, like infrastructure, like implementing programs at businesses and institutions, like municipal residential programs, things like that. We'll start carving out specific topics for more in-depth discussion. Typically in the past, and then developing a refined proposal as we go, both potentially changing the proposal, but also getting it a little more detailed. And as we go, we'll be updating our organics action plan that complements this development work. And again, fleshing out that proposal for what this expanded ban might look like. Typically in the past, that process has taken place over a 9 to 12-month period. There's no, formal time frame for a process like this. But that's, a kind of ballpark about what we've done in the past. Depending on where we come out of that, if we're still on track with some change to the regulations, we would then develop draft regulations and guidance. And of course, anytime we develop draft regulations and guidance, there's a public comment and hearing process as part of that regulatory process. But we got a ways to go before entering into a formal regulatory process. So we're not there. We need to go through all this discussion and program development work before we decide where we're going to go in terms of regulations. So that's still a ways down the road. But typically that's a 1 to 2 year time frame for a regulatory process. And then, of course, where we'd implement regulations, we'd establish effective date, we'd work on implementing the ban and supporting programs. Of course, this is all an iterative process, so we're kind of already working on this right now. We're already working on supporting businesses, ensuring waste ban compliance with our existing waste ban threshold, working with cities and towns to roll out programs, expanding our outreach through Recycling Works. These things are all works in progress already, and it's really iteratively building on what we're already doing. So that's kind of a look ahead. I have not scheduled the next meeting yet, but what I'm thinking about is a meeting in January, kind of as things settle down after the holidays, as folks kind of get back on track in January. We'll think about a meeting probably in the second half of January, and we'll be scheduling these as we go. I'm thinking of roughly every 6 to 8 weeks is about the right amount for us to ensure that we can do the work we need to do in between each meeting. But I'm going to be scheduling those as we go to make sure that the dates continue to, to fit and make sense as we go. So that's kind of a look ahead about where we're going. If you are not already on our organic subcommittee email list, I'd be happy to add you. The best way to do that is just send me an email. If you have questions and comments that either you don't get to share today, you think about after the call, you just want to talk about offline, feel free to reach out to me. Best way to do that is start with email. We can schedule a call or whatever would be most helpful. As we've kind of alluded to along the way here, if there are groups, if you have a group that you represent that you think would like to hear more about this, I'm always happy to have separate conversations with different groups. We did that a lot first 2 times around. Excuse me. And happy to do that at any point along the way. Our kind of informal motto about this work is that we'll talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime within reason. So always happy to reach out and have conversations about this. If you have, again, more detailed questions you want to talk with me about directly, I'm always happy to have those discussions. Always happy to, accept feedback via email as well. So, don't hesitate to reach out at any point along the way. This is the link where you can find our past organic subcommittee meeting notes and presentations and recordings. We will typically post the presentation and recording within a week or so after each meeting. So, sometime next week, expect to have this information posted online to share. I always send out a notice once we do that to let folks know it's available. So if you want to go back and check back on anything I presented or check back on any of the conversation or the presentation, we'll have the resources posted to do that. With that, that kind of concludes what I have to say, but I just want to give one last chance for anyone to raise a comment or question. If there's anything that we might have missed that you put in the chat that you want to make sure we catch, if you want to either raise your hand or unmute yourself to do that, feel free to do that at this point.
What social media are you using, John? I know there's like a Twitter or something, or I can't even remember, ZX, whatever it's called. Sorry, I don't use social media. But to maybe, really get this out there to a whole new audience that you're not everybody goes to web pages and downloads, SWAC meeting minutes and, so I'm just thinking you need every tool in your toolbox to start getting this out. I put MMA as an example. But I just think the more you get this on the radar with the date that you're talking about to stir a conversation, reach out to the various, Gannett media, they have local papers, all things we've been talking about. I think the sooner that this gets out there, you're going to find all these little things like Recycling Works mentioned, all the small farmers that want to work on this, but don't know how. You don't want to be scrambling at the end where you got 6 months to go before the deadline. So, but social media is a whole other world. I'm not, expert on that at all, but I think it's something the state may want to consider really looking into the various formats, videos of successful operations, restaurants are doing well, Recycling Works, just, put them out there. So there you go. Just throw that out there for consideration.
Yeah. MassDEP does have social media accounts we work through, Facebook, LinkedIn. I believe we still post to X. So yeah, we can certainly, we've been doing some outreach around our work on food waste reduction as we've gone, but we can certainly try to do more of that. I know Recycling Works is active on social media as well.
Yeah.
So
Instagram, what's the other one? Snapchat.
yeah, Instagram. We do
TikTok.
we do post to Instagram as well.
Okay, cool.
We also have, this is not directly related to this, but Our Recycle Smart program is also very active on social media, and from time to time, they've delved into food waste reduction issues as part of their work. Not their primary focus, but we do touch on related issues sometimes through the Recycle Smart MA program now. So that's another way we do that. Okay, any other final comments before we wrap up here? My sharing. Well, thanks very much for joining us here today. I appreciate your time and participation, and please, continue to reach out at any point if you have questions or comments you want to share with us, and we'll be in touch as we go here. So thanks again for joining, everyone. We'll talk soon. If I don't talk to you before, I hope you have happy holidays.